As Ottoman forces tightened their grip around Belgrade in the mid-15th century, the imbalance between attacker and defender was impossible to ignore. On one side stood a professional imperial army equipped with artillery, steel weapons, and decades of battlefield experience. On the other stood a mass of volunteers whose weapons were not forged in workshops, but pulled from fields and barns. Most carried no swords, wore no armor, and possessed little understanding of warfare. What they relied on instead was faith. These crusaders were not soldiers in any conventional sense. Many were peasants who had never held a weapon beyond farming tools. Others were refugees displaced by earlier conflicts, laborers hardened by poverty, and men whose lives offered little promise of survival, regardless of the outcome. Their equipment reflected their origins. Sickles, clubs, wooden spears, scythes, and crude axes replaced steel blades. Leather armor was rare. Helmets were almost non-existent. Against cannon fire and trained infantry, such tools should have been meaningless, yet they came anyway. The movement grew not from royal decree, but from religious conviction. Inspired by radical preaching that framed the Ottoman advance as both a physical and spiritual threat, thousands volunteered despite overwhelming odds. They were told not that they would win, but that they would matter. In a world where social rank defined value, belief became the great equalizer. Military observers were openly dismissive. Without armor, even a glancing blow could be fatal. Without swords, they could not match trained opponents in close combat. Without formations, they risked panic and collapse. From a strategic perspective, their presence seemed more dangerous to their own side than to the enemy. But the logic of faith followed different rules. For these crusaders, protection did not come from steel, but from conviction. They believed survival rested in divine will rather than tactical advantage. This belief altered behavior in ways that surprised both allies and enemies. Fear, while present, was reinterpreted as a test rather than a signal to retreat. Death was not the worst outcome. Failure of faith was. This mindset did not make them invincible, but it made them resilient. When cannon fire shattered walls and bodies alike, the expectation was collapse. Instead, others stepped forward. When breaches opened, men armed with tools rushed into spaces designed for trained soldiers. Losses were heavy, but resolve remained. The absence of armor also produced unintended effects. Lightly equipped, these fighters moved quickly. They climbed rubble, carried supplies, and repaired defenses under fire with speed heavier troops could not match. Their familiarity with manual labor proved valuable. Where professionals focused on combat, these volunteers sustained the physical survival of the fortress. Farm tools, though crude, were not entirely ineffective. In close quarters, clubs and scythes could still kill. Against ladders, siege equipment, and climbing infantry, strength and proximity mattered more than elegance. Improvisation replaced technique. Brutality replaced finesse. More significant than their weapons, however, was their presence. Numbers mattered. Even poorly armed men could hold space, delay advances, and exhaust attackers. Siege warfare depended on pressure and predictability. The Crusaders disrupted both. Their willingness to rush into danger created chaos at moments when attackers expected submission. Ottoman commanders were accustomed to disciplined resistance or swift collapse. What they encountered instead was irregular defiance. Men who should have broken did not. Positions thought cleared were reoccupied. Counterattacks emerged from breaches without warning. The logic of fear failed. Inside the fortress, professional leaders adapted. They did not rely on crusaders for precision combat, but used them where their strengths mattered most. They reinforced weak points, supported counterattacks, and absorbed losses that would have crippled smaller forces. The gap between trained soldier and believer narrowed under pressure. Psychologically, the contrast between steel and faith shaped the battle. Ottoman soldiers trusted armor, formation, and command. The Crusaders trusted belief. When steel failed to bring quick victory, confidence eroded. When men without armor continued to advance, assumptions shattered. War is fought not only with weapons, but with expectations. Critics later argued that such reliance on faith bordered on recklessness. Losses among the Crusaders were severe. Many died without ever striking a meaningful blow. Their lack of protection ensured high casualties. From a purely military perspective, the cost was unacceptable. Yet without them, the defense would likely have failed sooner. Armor protects bodies, but numbers protect time. Time was the most valuable resource available. Each hour the fortress held reduced Ottoman momentum and increased strain on their supply lines. The Crusaders bought that time with their lives. Their belief also stabilized morale. In moments when professional troops wavered, the sight of unarmored men standing firm reinforced resolve. Courage proved contagious. Faith, once mocked, became an asset. After the siege lifted, the image of men armed with tools standing against an empire spread across Europe. Some interpreted it as divine intervention, others as proof of desperation. Both interpretations were correct. Faith filled a vacuum created by political failure and military shortage. The Crusaders did not transform warfare. Steel remained superior to belief in most contexts. Armor still saved lives. Training still mattered. But this episode demonstrated that under extreme conditions, conviction could temporarily compensate for material weakness. Most of these men returned to obscurity. Survivors went back to farms, roads, and margins. No monuments recorded their names. Their tools returned to soil rather than battlefields. History moved on. Yet their role endures as a reminder that power is not always measured in equipment. Sometimes it emerges when people with nothing left decide that belief is enough. Not because it guarantees victory, but because it makes resistance possible. Weapons of faith did not defeat an empire alone, but they delayed it, disrupted it, and reminded Europe that steel is not the only force capable of shaping events. In moments of collapse, belief itself can become a weapon. Just tell me, and I'll continue seamlessly.